Future Sense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nick Jeans and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, Future Sense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is Future Sense. 10:22 here on Bay FM on Future Sense with myself, Nick, and Steve, as you just heard there.
Yeah, so for the rest of our show, we're going to talk now about local action, and with an understanding of the role of this emerging paradigm as creating a foundation for a much larger shift. You know, what action can we take, what useful action can we take that is in line with the sort of flows and the way this sixth layer of human consciousness is drawing us, yet also, you know, understands the limitations that it brings, and the fact that we really don't have the capacity yet to resolve some of our most significant problems at a global level. But what we can do is understand that that is coming. It's written in the code, if you like, of our own development, that this will happen. It's inevitable. And what we're in now is like a preparatory stage. So I guess one of the most important things to bear in mind is that the old paradigm is collapsing, and the things that were created by the old paradigm, and talking about the scientific industrial paradigm, we should expect to collapse, and if not disappear, at least fall away in terms of their capacity to influence life on a large scale. And one of those the most obvious thing really is centralised government, and we're seeing this already, that our centralised governments are less and less able to address the issues that are most important to us in society.
Especially on the peripheries of society, in rural or local regions, other places,
That's
on
right.
the margins.
And I guess first and foremost is they're not exhibiting the emerging values. So the ways in which human values are changing are not being exhibited by our governments. And while many dedicated people are trying as best they can to get into these centralised governments and make changes, it's not happening quick enough. I don't see it being a viable solution. And in fact, you know, the way that this shift in consciousness is coded, it's not likely to be. We're being redirected now to take a much more local view in all respects. And so really a central part of this revolution, if you like, is about building resilient local communities. It's really, really important.
Yeah.
And first and foremost in that process is the capacity and the focus on consolidating these new values. So coming together with like-minded people who exhibit these new values, and I'm talking about valuing things like human rights, equal opportunity, you know, a balanced society, a harmonious society, a peaceful society, and a society that has a tight network structure that acts as a support mechanism, like a scaffolding, you know, in the same way that when you're building a new building, you put a scaffold around it to help it hang together while it's being built. And so our local community networks are that scaffolding, and that's really what we need to be focusing on at the moment.
Very good. Yes.
Part of that, I guess, that relocalization process is looking to relocalize things like food supply and energy generation. We're already seeing food shortages globally, and this is only going to increase with the climate change that's coming. So if you look back to the last winter in the US, they had a polar vortex come down across North America and massively disrupt food production in North America. It seems to be that the US government has been trying to suppress the impact of that. So if you look at the Department of Agriculture and other reporting agencies from the centralized government in the US, they're not really dwelling on the amount of food production which was disrupted there. But it has been the worst corn season on record in North America. I think we've mentioned that on the show previously. And there have been food shortages right across America in some of the big supermarket chains where people haven't been able to get food, and there have been signs on the shelves saying, sorry, we don't have any of this at the moment. And we're likely to see more of that. I think we've been fortunate so far here in Australia, but again, we're facing the same issues here. We've had serious disruption to our wheat production, and it looks likely that we're going to be facing further drought here. So that's going to mean more disruption to our food production. And we need to look to localised food supply, and of course, in places like this Byron Shire area where we're broadcasting from, we're already some way down the track with this. We have really solid local markets, local food producers who are growing organic food, who are changing the way that they grow their food to get away from all of the problems that have been created by the previous paradigm with the use of chemicals and
transportation costs, et cetera,
all those sorts of things. And I'm also, I'm interested to know if you're listening somewhere around the world and you're seeing some wonderful early stage developments with these sorts of trends. We'd like to hear about that, and we'd like to be able to talk about it on the show. So you can email me, Steve at futuresense.it, or Nick, NYCK, at futuresense.it if you'd like to send us information about what's going on in your local area. There's an interesting podcast that I've been listening to, and I've mentioned before on the show, which is called Ice Age Farmer, and that is all about local food production and using modern technologies to be able to produce larger quantities of food more efficiently and more cleanly than we have been doing so far. Another big area that we can focus on in this relocalization trend is energy generation. And you can imagine that as our national governments are slowly collapsing before our eyes, one of the things they do, of course, is they maintain, our large-scale infrastructure. And again, here in Australia, as an example, we're already seeing the demise of a lot of that infrastructure, where the government's been selling it off, privatising it because it can't afford to maintain it anymore. And now, with the emergence of new energy generation technologies, we're going to see that some of that infrastructure is going to be even less well maintained because it's not needed, because people are generating power locally using solar and other means. And we're also seeing, and we should expect, further emergence of new energy generation technology. One of the ones that's come to my attention most recently is magnetic generators, which have a sort of a circular rotating device which is propelled by magnetic energy. So it has magnets in it. The ones that I've seen so far, which are just starting to emerge commercially, require some mains power to give them a kickstart, but once they start running, then this interaction between magnets inside the rotating device keeps them going.
Yes, there's a perpetual motion, but it's triggered by some input first up.
Yeah, and this is early stage. I guess we need to see these things rolled out and put into service to actually see whether they do run perpetually or whether they do replacing after a while. But nonetheless, we ought to plan on this, and we ought to be looking at carefully and taking advantage of these new technologies as they roll out in order to shore up our local sustainability and really to empower ourselves locally. And as this happens on a larger scale, we're going to see a phenomenon which is a little bit like how water changes into, from the liquid state into the boiling state when you look at a jug. So if you've got, I just bought a new jug not long ago, and it's a glass one where you can actually see what's going on, which is really cool.
I love that.
Yeah, and so as the water heats up, then you slowly see these little bubbles forming all around in different places, and eventually it gets to a tipping point where the water starts to boil, and all the bubbles, they break out, and you get a whole massive boiling water. And that really is the same way that this revolution is going to take place globally, and is already taking place, I might say, is we've got little bubbles of humanity which are cropping up with different values, with different worldviews, and different ways of being human. And the more of those little bubbles that crop up all around the place as individual bubbles, are going to lead us to a breakout point where all of a sudden all those bubbles will connect up to each other, and we'll have, before we know it, the sudden transformation of life on this planet.
Yes. And one of the other areas which is rather interesting, and interesting in your thoughts here, Steve, a report a couple of days ago in the Sydney Morning Herald talks about depression, anxiety being more common than coughs, colds in GP waiting rooms. Just that. The Royal Australian College of General Practitioners Health of the Nation report, just recently released, shows mental health problems have replaced physical conditions as the most common ailments doctors treat. So this is also a very interesting area, isn't it, moving forward, how to treat the mental health issues that are arising in such propensity now.
Yeah, and this does seem to be in line with the kind of changes that were indicated in the developmental psychology research that I've been studying for many years. Is the modern scientific industrial paradigm is driven by success, and it's all about changing the world around you to make you feel more successful. And the mindset that comes with that is that success is a result of the amount of time and effort you expend. And I can remember years ago coming to the realization that that was just an aspect of a particular worldview. And at the time, I, of course, had been previously immersed in this world where I felt like I had to work faster and harder in order to be more successful and get where I wanted to be sooner. And then I went through a transformational shift, and it suddenly dawned on me that, wow, actually, there are people in this world who don't live that way, and yet they have everything that they want and they live a happy life. So it's a very big thing to come to that realization that what you had pinned your whole existence on, your anchor points, your human values that sort of supported your worldview, actually aren't universal truths. And that's a big realization.
It's a big realization. Although, just to add to that, that there's always some truth that may be valuable as we move forward in each expression, in each paradigm.
Each worldview and each set of values is perfectly adapted to life conditions which it's suited to. But just getting back to your mental health article, that idea of having to work faster and harder, of course, leads to the kind of health issues that have been the main issues doctors have been called to address in the past, which are things like colds and flu, and what was the other thing that was in that
cold,
article?
flu, and that's what it says here. Colds, flus, and other. Well, basically physical disorders of any type.
That I think it's back pain actually.
Back pain.
It was back pain. So all of these things, if you think about it, they come from working too hard. And then what we're seeing now is a shift away from that towards mental health issues, and those mental health issues really fit with the themes of the emergent paradigm, which is driven by a need for deep human connection. And we're coming out of a paradigm that has created a society that is structured around individuality. So even our social media, which is supposed to connect us, is actually not doing that because it's connecting us remotely, not personally. And we miss that intimate personal interaction that we are now craving so strongly as our values shift into this new era.
Just a little bit more on that health thing, which is interesting here too, because the current Medicare model and the model of going, when you visit your GP, you get 15 minutes if you're lucky, and that's no criticism of doctors, that's the system that we're under now. But when it comes to these shorter consultations for more straightforward health conditions, it undervalues the longer consultations that are needed for complex issues such as psychological problems. Rebates also for mental health illnesses consultations are also lower than those for physical illness, according to the report. And the graph they've got here is quite telling. The psychological issues that are taken to GPs now hugely over musculoskeletal problems, respiratory, and all the others come down the line there. It's a really big change, and fairly recent. I mean, we're probably talking about a decade or two at the most, and that change towards those more psychological problems.
And it's a classic example of how the structure within where our doctors are called to work at the moment is crafted by the old paradigm, where you have to try and see more people quicker. And so what it's done is it's reduced those appointment times down to 15 minutes, which just don't cut it anymore because the nature of what people are presenting with is changing entirely. And the mental health issues that we're seeing emerge now are really a result of people not being able to satisfy that need for deep human connection within the structure of society. That's it. So it's giving rise to depression. People are becoming depressed. And Claire Graves wrote about this in his research that he did back in the 1950s and 60s when he was seeing people who were going through this value set. He was seeing this happening, and he wrote that these people have a deep need for human connection, and when they don't get it, they become depressed.
And you've seen that, as you mentioned, Facebook before, the supposed connection that Facebook and other social media platforms gives you is actually a bit of a false game. It's not, doesn't satisfy most people in the end, and we're probably seeing that quite a lot now. I think a lot of people are feeling that.
Yeah.
Just don't engage with it because you're not getting what you actually need from it.
No, that's right. It's literally virtual connection.
Yeah.
Literally, yeah.
It's 10:37 here on Future Sense. We'll take a little break and we'll be back shortly. You're tuned to Future Sense with Nick Jeans and Steve McDonald. Engage, emerge, activate, and spiral up.
Bay FM wishes to advise that the views expressed in this program are not necessarily the views of the Bay FM Management Committee, volunteers, operational staff, or members.
You're tuned to Future Sense here with Steve McDonald and myself, Nick Jeans.
And we're talking about local action to prepare for the huge changes which many of us sense are coming down the track, and particularly over the next decade or so. And we're talking about compounding issues that have arisen out of the previous paradigm, like pollution, like the destruction of natural resources, and also the collapse of our social structures, which have been built by the old paradigm from an individual mindset, and which are quite obviously now slowly failing to meet our needs. As the world becomes a more complex place, we're feeling drawn to live in communal ways rather than individual ways now, back to the we, us, our trend, as opposed to the I, me, mine trend from the scientific industrial era. And we've just been talking about what we can do locally, based around the understanding that the emerging paradigm and the emerging value set, which is the sixth layer of human consciousness laid over the fifth scientific industrial layer, is really a relatively short-term stepping stone to a much larger transformation of human consciousness, which is the shift from what we call first-tier human consciousness into second-tier human consciousness. And that shift is really a quantum leaping capacity. And it is a quantum leap because, from an evolutionary point of view, our species is at a point where we need to make a quantum leap in order to resolve the issues that we're facing to continue to survive on this planet. And I think that at this time in history, it's extremely important to be able to step back and see this map to the future, to see that what's going on now is not it's not a last blast or a final ditch attempt. It's actually the creation of a foundation from which we can leap to something much, much greater.
And that's a really great perspective to take, if we can. That's certainly a perspective that I've come more to in the last period of time, exactly that, rather than seeing everything emotionally negative. And yes, there's plenty of evidence to say so, but to see it more from that perspective that you're articulating there.
And even if you find that hard to believe, if you just have a think about what happens when you become discouraged about life, and what happens when you become unhappy with what your experience is, you tend to go into a depressed state, and when you're in a depressed state, you become less active and less capable of actually solving your own problems, right? Yeah. And as a species, if we get lost in the horror of what we're seeing around the world and become depressed as a species, then we're really signing our own death warrant. And so the answer is to actually shift your perspective and see what's happening at the moment as an opportunity, as a foundation that's being laid for a much, much larger leaping capacity. Then from that perspective, we're much more likely to successfully make this transition into second tier. And I honestly must say that I don't doubt for a moment that this is going to happen. From everything I know and everything that I've studied, I'm seeing that, okay, we're actually past the critical point in terms of change. And this is exhibited by what's playing out around the planet right at the moment, where large groups of people are taking to the streets and saying, okay, everything needs to change. And that's where we needed to get to for this to play out. In order to navigate this next decade of change as smoothly as possible, and which, with as little disruption as possible, we need to actually understand the change process and understand that we need to take an active part in this change. And we need to expect there to be challenges. We need to plan for the challenges ahead, and many of them are predictable. I mean, if you look around at the world at the moment, you can see these things happening. You can see governments starting to fail. You can see our social systems becoming wobbly. You can see problems with food and water supply. You can see problems emerging with increasing population migration, those sorts of things. And so we need to take action on these things now, and it needs to start locally. As many people have said throughout history, we need to start locally. We need to start building resilient communities. We need to start giving our local communities the capacity to support themselves without reliance on these large national structures, which are quite clearly failing to meet our needs already, in the early stages of this collapse process.
From the website I've quoted from a couple of times today from David Smart, called thinkingwithdavid.com. Some interesting stuff here regarding the developmental psychology we're talking about here. He talks about the radical shift, as you're speaking here, from first tier to second tier, as we configure here. And he says that second tier believes each of the first tier stages has some grain of truth and accepts the world as an amalgam of many partially true perspectives, and not a my truth is the only truth perspective. It is a radical shift in thinking and requires a frightening degree of open-mindedness. And just a question there is that movement from, because in the first tier, as I understand it, generally whatever paradigm that one may be operating from down through history or still at this time, the tendency is to say, my answer is the answer. Yeah. My way is the way.
Yeah.
Whereas as we move to second tier, it's, well, no, actually every way has a piece that may have a piece of the puzzle to help us solve the problems that we have in front of us. That's a big leap in itself, isn't it? Just that.
It is a big leap, yeah. And we need to understand that these shifts of worldview as we move from one layer of consciousness to the next are not rational choices, and this is a really important thing to take note of, is that, this is not about morally convincing somebody that they need to change their worldview. It's actually about working with the life conditions themselves, and Clare Graves was very, very clear on this when he first presented his theory, his model, many years ago. We don't go through transformational change because it's a good idea. We don't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to change my worldview. What we do is respond. We respond at the deepest level, the deepest subconscious level, to a shift in our framework of making sense of reality. And that shift is an adaptation to an increase in complexity of life conditions. And so if we are going to support people to make this shift, what we need to do is we need to change people's life conditions.
Yeah.
And that can be as simple as making sure they've got access to food and water. It can be that simple. And if you think about it, when you don't have the basic survival needs, then
you're not thinking about big picture stuff.
You don't think about big picture stuff, and your worldview will, often turn to a power-based, violent worldview. I mean, this is what we see around the world when people are deprived of their basic needs, right? They often become violent, and so that's a very crude example, but it's so important to understand how life conditions are the key to supporting this shift. And so one of the things that we can do, again, at a local level is to make available the very best technologies that we can find for the transformation of human consciousness. And they will be technologies that put people in a place of radically different life conditions. And one way that we can do that is through altered state technologies, where people for a short period of time are immersed in a completely different perspective on reality.
And of course this has happened even through the growth in yoga and mindfulness and all of that sort of body health consciousness, superfoods and the whole consciousness around food generally speaking, and beyond that too. We talk a lot here about the new psychedelic revolution, so that's also included in what you're saying, of course.
Yeah, and this has actually been the foundation of spirituality,
Yes.
all time, really.
Yeah.
If you discount the aberration which has been modern religion for the last couple of thousand years, and look back through the whole history of humanity, you'll find that most of the time our spirituality, which you might say is at the deepest level, a framework for making sense of existence.
Yeah, having purpose, having meaning perhaps, and so forth.
So it's been based around direct experience and putting people into situations where they can have a direct experience of something different. And historically, that's come from things like sensory deprivation, whether it be in dark caves or in buildings constructed for
Burying
purpose.
someone in the ground, which some Indigenous communities in Australia did here, I think, burying you up to your neck in the ground for overnight.
Exactly. And also the use of sound has been another very common way of doing it, whether it be blowing a didgeridoo or chanting a mantra and those sorts of things.
Yep.
And you can see clearly already in the shift that's going on around the planet how there is a movement back towards these things, back towards spirituality as a direct experience. And that is, I guess, one of the easiest ways that we can change our life conditions is to change that inner experience of reality by getting into an altered state. And of course, altered states are not something weird or new. Everybody goes into an altered state every night when they go to sleep, right? And they enter into another dream world.
It's no big
right?
deal. It's okay.
Yeah. And we all disappear into a dream world, and we have radically different experiences and wake up next morning. And it's now a matter of consciously using that particular technology in order to support change, by allowing people to go into an altered state, have a radically transformed view or perspective of reality, and coming back thinking differently. And so what I envisage in the future is that we will have access to these technologies in our local communities in ways that we have in years gone by. I mean, if you go way back to a period before the structured religions which came out of the agricultural era were so dominant on the planet, then you would find in local communities these sacred sites, these temples, these sanctuaries where people would go to have these experiences, and it was a very healthy way of supporting growth for
Indeed. Yes. Very good. We don't really have time to expand quickly on this, but I did want your view on, because we've talked about national governments and old paradigm systems generally failing, but I wondered about global systems such as the United Nations and how that configures into this. Just briefly, we've only got a couple of minutes before we finish up.
Yeah, I think we just need to bear in mind that anything that arose during an old paradigm is unlikely to be the answer for the future. Okay, that's the most important thing. And so structures like the United Nations have been designed from old mindsets, and over time they've become so embedded in the social structures of the old paradigm that they really are incapable of changing sufficiently to address our needs for the future. So I think we definitely have to develop a method of coordinating ourselves globally. There's no doubt about that, but I can guarantee it's not going to come from an existing institution that was designed with old thinking. It's going to come out of something emergent, something quite different.
Yes, yeah, wonderful. Well, I think we'll leave it there. And folks, anything that you'd like to communicate with us is always on the text line here when we're on air. 0437341119. And thanks for a couple of texts here. Thanks again, guys. Excellent overview of what's going on and how to respond. So unusual to hear such intelligent coverage of the big picture story within which we are living. Thank you. Thanks to Dudley for that. And indeed, and you can also communicate with us on our Twitter accounts, Future Sense Show, at Future Sense Show, and all of our podcasts can be accessed, I can't even speak today, I don't know why, through futuresense.it. It's a simple portal website, but also you can just go to iTunes or probably most of your normal podcast platforms and find us, Future Sense.
Thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed the show, then tell some others about it.
Yeah. See you next week. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye. You've been listening to Future Sense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. Future Sense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.